Non-duality is so tricky to talk about, right? Like mostly what can be talked about, and even that's questionable sometimes how meaningful it is or how well it can be spoken about. But essentially what can be spoken about is the process of awakening, right? Its various phases, insights and so on. But all of that can be a little bit misleading because the actuality of non-duality, for the lack of a better word, so this kind of basic nature of experience, which turns to be completely experienceless in its essence. So that's the thing that is kind of indescribable. And that's what I sometimes call true no self, right? As opposed to no self as an insight, which often comes with, experiential byproducts and an acclimation and kind of deepening of the insight and all of that. So that particular expression, no self, it only makes sense as long as there is some sort of experience of the opposite, right? Which is self, which is being negated, or that there's still some sort of processing happening in the experience, which is comparing, this absence of self to apparent self that used to be there, right? So this what I then call sometimes true no self is what could be then called this when it's so integrated, right? This insight to this everyday basic nature of experiencing. And when the intensity has calmed down and the processing in the body mind has settled, then it doesn't make at all sense to call it no self. Like that expression becomes absolutely meaningless, equally meaningless as, self, So any kind of I statement that is seen to be essentially, lacking any inherent reality, in the same way the expression there is no self is also lacking any inherent reality. So that's why it's so hard to talk about what is then left. But that's what I would also call non-duality, experientially speaking, or the natural state. So I use often these three terms, referring pretty much to the same thing: the natural state, non-duality, like experientially speaking, and no self, as integrated insight. And I must say that I detest a little bit the word integration because it sounds a bit too much like processing or doership to me, to something which is so obviously lacking any agency and doership, and it's not benefiting anyone. It's not, there's not going to be any kind of self or anything left there, that could in any possible way claim this insight. So you could say that the insight in itself is also traceless. It's like this no trace quality, and there's nothing or no one that could be tracking that. Okay, something like that. It just sounds weird in words. But yeah, so all of this experience of the self, and then the experience of deconstruction of self, and the awakening insights that it results in. So all of that type of processing is exactly what apparently veils this basic nature of experiencing. And the only way that I can talk about it is pretty much through negation. Okay, like it's so if I should say like what is this? Like just this suchness that is undeniably occurring, right? It's not nothing. So what is it? Well, it's not consciousness. Okay, so all of those forms of spirituality that advocate consciousness as the ultimate reality, absolute consciousness, well, that is all seen to be a phase in the process that gets kind of deconstructed. Okay, so I'm not saying that there is no consciousness. Okay, it's just not there as a perceiving agent of the experience. Okay, and it's definitely not there as some sort of ontological statement, that this is the what reality is made of. Okay, because the fundamental sense of this suchness is that it's really unknowable. Like, can't really say what it is. Can't say that it is not, but it's also not really even happening in a way that we think about what existence is, right? Because it's almost like this inherent reality, is so absent, but that then brings this association with this very void-like, vacuous nature, right? Just or spaciousness that can also have this association, just like as opposed to something solid and substantial being there, and this is not like that, right? So when that opposite pair has collapsed, like solidity and spaciousness, for example, or solidity and porosity, what is left? It's very full. Okay, it's very full. Even there's nothing there if you care to look closer or feel closer or sense closer into it, in a sense that you can't locate anything. You can't find any boundaries. You can find beginning to anything. You can find end to anything. You can't find time. You can't find any substance. You can't even find some sort of void or nothingness, or emptiness as some sort of substanceless substance that everything is made of. So even that is being kind of deconstructed. Like even that is seen to be a kind of reification. You just really can't find anything there, and that act of trying to find and not being able to find, that's exactly that undefinable quality, that it's kind of like nothing, but it's also everything, right? And yeah, kind of anything that I would say about it, it's not it. Like even calling it freedom or self-liberation, that's like one of the best pointers that I can give to it, this, whatever this is, that its nature is this constant act of self-release, self-liberation. Like there's just constant kind of integration, disintegration happening, constant arising and dissolving, but at the same time, it's not arising as something actually existing, and it's almost like it's dissolving before it's even arising. Like it's just so transient and so ungraspable. So it's kind of like you're kind of like fluctuating there in between existence and non-existence. It's kind of like both and neither, but you're not there. It's just this quality of phenomena constantly self-releasing, totally spontaneously, without having any ground, without having any basis. It's just immediately, spontaneously release, 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 release. And they don't leave a trace, and you can't find there any kind of unifying substance or unifying agency that could be called self, or any kind of continuity of a perceiver. Like that sense of being a perceiver, that's just another appearance self-releasing. So that experience of universal presence, absolute presence, as some sort of background, which is more primary than the arising and dissolving of phenomena, right? So that is seen to be a phase in the process. That's not, if you understand presence as something like that, like how it's often discussed in Advaita, for example, then this is nothing like that. It's not presence like that. It's not presence that can be attributed to anything whatsoever, not even something called consciousness. So I actually prefer to refer to it as spontaneity that doesn't belong to anything or anyone. It doesn't belong to consciousness, right? Because that is already too much reification to assume this idea of absolute consciousness that would possess all these attributes. So too much processing for this, whatever this is. And now I'm talking about this non-dual experienceless nature, prior to conceptualization or processing. So even though this basic nature of experiencing that is in Georgian, it's called, Rikpa, you could say that it's our true nature, right? Our real nature, but it's not identity in any kind of way that we are used to think about identity. So it's not some sort of true self, okay, underneath the false constructed self. It's nothing like that. It's really a thorough deconstruction of any kind of form of identity, or the need to have any kind of form of identity. You see that all of that just, it was never really even happening. I know this sounds, I don't know how this sounds, but I know it sounds kind of nonsense, because when we're really deep in the mind identification and in the experience of separation and personal identity and so on, and there's all the suffering and then saying that all of that's not actually happening. I don't know how that sounds, but it is actually the reality of it. It is actually that the case that it's just not happening in a way that we think it is happening. We think that it's happening with some sort of actual continuity in time, the sense of self, but it's not ever. There are just these flashes, these bubble-like appearances, and that illusory sense of continuity and heaviness of identity with all the fabrication and processing around it. It's like spontaneously created and created and created and created and created and created and created. Okay. So when you're deconstructing that fundamental delusion, you're not deconstructing something actually existing. You're more like looking into the way how you are creating it in the moment by moment. And just by looking into it, it just starts to lose its believability in a way, okay? So in that sense, it's not even, questioning beliefs. I mean, it is, but when it is seen that there's no one or nothing here that could be believing to any of that stuff in the first place, then it becomes like kind of ridiculous. Like, what is that belief, that act of believing in the first place? It's more like at some point you just can't believe in it anymore. That's more correct way of saying it, I think, than than that you just get rid of all your beliefs. Okay, it's more like you just can't believe in something when you see that it's kind of like a magic trick how it's created, a magic trick again and again and again. And even though the body mind can still habitually create it, because through the conditioned way of behaving and thinking, it's so rooted in our system that it just doesn't immediately magically stop happening. Like even when you have to shift, that is sometimes called no self, where the fundamental root illusion, that holds it together is being seen through and released. So it's irreversible, but it doesn't mean that just automatically any kind of experience of self ever arises again. It's just not like that at all. So there's this very bizarre period of acclimation that follows the shift, where there's processing that takes place and clarification and deepening of the insight. And it's very absolutely necessary that that happens, so that these subtle ways of creating the self or reifying the self, they're being seen through again and again and again and again. And at this point, it's purely spontaneous, like all this occurrence, like no one is doing it. There's no agency, there's no doership. It's just what's happening. Okay. And it's kind of seen that that's how it's always been. It always was like that. The doership was never there. The agency was never there, so it doesn't actually fall away. But what falls away is this illusory sense of control over the experience, which is mainly experienced as tremendous resistance and fear. So that falls away. And then everything can just get really kind of carefree, in a sense that you feel and sense how absolutely weightless all of this is. It's just this play of appearances happening to no one, and nothing accumulates. And fundamentally, these phases of awakening, they're just forms of appearance. So the only thing that doesn't come and go is this basic nature in all of this what I started this video by talking about, calling it the non-duality, right? Which is really beyond description, but it's totally self-obvious and self-evident every moment. Like the experience could never be anything other than that. So it's kind of undeniable. It's undeniable. But to say anything about it, it's just kind of like too much processing. Okay, I hope this made some sense. Why I was rambling here.